Last week, I put out a video showing you how to avoid stripey layouts in your designs. That video got a lot of attention, and while I had some people agree with me and thank me for the information, I had quite a few people who disagreed, and some that even said it would make it a nightmare on the developer to build out. Now, that threw me for a bit of a loop, because when I design something, I usually am the developer who has to build it out, and I didn't see anything in this design that would be particularly difficult. So in this week's video, I thought I would take you through my process of taking the same stripey design and creating all the same effects we did inside the Figma file, but live here inside of a website. I'm going to be doing all this using GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks inside WordPress, but I'm also going to show you how you could do many of these things just using CSS so you could apply them to whichever builder you use. If you'd like to see how I tackle all these challenges, then stick around and let's get started. So I've gone ahead and built out the original stripey version from the Figma file here inside the browser. So that saved you from having to see me set up all the colors and typography, and all of these are pretty simple sections. They're either 1 column or 2 column layouts, so I don't think there was any real learning opportunities here. As far as the tech stack, we can go into the back end here, and you can see in my plugins, I have GenerateBlocks, GenerateBlocks Pro, GeneratePress Premium, and the SVG support plugin so I can upload some SVG files. As far as the theme, I have gone ahead and uploaded GeneratePress and then installed a child theme. I did that because I just wanted to bring in some of the defaults from my child theme that set things like spacing and some typography just to make the process of building out my site a little bit simpler, although I don't think any of these things are going to come into play as we make these changes. So as to what's on the agenda here, we need to get rid of this stripe at the top where this pre-menu is. We need to bring in this hero section. Here we want to overlap this content onto the hero. In this section, we want to get rid of this gray background and use that little gradient shape that I made. Same thing on this one, except reversed the other side. In the testimonial section, we're going to get rid of this gray background and add those dashed borders. And then here in the footer, we're going to bring those in to match the hero. Now, there's no real rhyme or reason into what order I do all these things, but let's start by working on this hero section where we're going to bring it in to kind of match what we did inside the Figma file. If you remember here in the Figma file, the hero section doesn't go quite to the edge, but it is wider than the rest of the content width. So let's go ahead and tackle how we would do that first. Here, I'm going to go to Edit Page, and we'll jump into the editor. We'll pop open the list view here so you can see everything that's going on, and we have our hero section here. Now, never mind that this gets a little bit wonky when I select it. You'll see my pseudo element that I have to set up this image and overlay here gets a little bit weird inside the editor when I select it, so you'll just have to ignore that for now. All we need to do to fix this section is kind of wrap it in another container. Thankfully, we have a button to do that here, where we're just going to click Add to Container, and now that hero section is inside this container here. Now what we need to do is add some padding on the left and the right of the inside of this container, and we're just going to match the padding that we had here on this hero section. I've actually set that up in this default utility class called Section D. If we go into the spacing here, I've used a clamp value for my left and right padding. This just makes it so that the padding is a little bit bigger on desktop and a little bit smaller on mobile. I want to reuse that same idea here on this outer container, so I'm going to copy that value. I'm going to go into the spacing, and I'm going to paste it in for the left and right values here. And we'll go ahead and hit Update and take a look at this on the front end. Now we can see we have a little bit of space of white on the right and on the left, but we still got some work to do. We need to round these corners for this entire section, and we don't want this going all the way out to the edge of the screen. We wanted to create kind of another container size here. So let's tackle those things next. Back here in the editor, we'll grab our hero section here, and we'll go down to the borders, and we'll change the border radius to 12 pixels all the way around. And you can see that's rounded out these corners and kind of soften those edges. The next thing we want to do is restrict the overall width of this hero section. We don't want it going all the way out to the edge minus that padding. We want to stop it at 1440 pixels. So I'm going to go in here to the max width and set the max width of this section to 1440 pixels. Again, we're going to update this and refresh it on the front end. And you can see that section's got a lot smaller now, but it's kind of offset to the left here. So that's the last thing we need to fix. Again, with this hero section selected, we'll go down here to the margin and we'll do an auto margin on the left and the right, which will essentially just center this on the screen. Again, we'll refresh it, and now we can see this text is lining up here in our content area, and the background has taken up this 1440 pixels wide, which kind of breaks that container here. I have a copy of the stripey version here, which I'll just bring up, and I've put stripey into the title so we can flip back and forth. Here's the original stripey version of the hero, and here's the version where we've kind of contained this hero section. It's a subtle change, but for me, this makes a pretty big improvement on this design. It doesn't look as boxy or generic here because it has just a little bit more style. I'm not saying you can't ever use a stripey layout anywhere. I'm just saying in this particular layout, I like this look better. And if your designs aren't quite feeling right, then doing something like this could improve the look and feel of them. Let's go ahead and make sure this is looking okay in responsive versions. So I'm going to just open the inspector here and we'll go into responsive mode. Here on desktop, it looks fine. As we squeeze in, because we've added that padding to this outer container, it's going to match up with the rest of our site here, which is exactly what I wanted. And as we go in here to our tablet version, which we can see breaks to a hamburger menu, this still works great here, except we've lost these rounded corners. Now this just happens to be because of the way I built out this section. I used a pseudo element to kind of mask off this image, and that pseudo element has a higher Z index. So you're probably not going to run into that issue unless you're doing exactly how I did it here, but I'll show you how to fix it just in case. So we know we need to fix that, but let's go ahead and check mobile just to make sure. Here on mobile, everything's still lining up really nice. So I think all we need to do are fix those rounded corners on tablet and mobile. So again, we'll jump back in here to the editor, and with the hero section selected, I'm just going to go into layout and change this overflow to hidden on both the X and Y axes and hit update. We'll refresh it on the front end and get down to our tablet version where that didn't have rounded corners before, and now that looks to be fixed. So we've completely fixed up this hero section to match our Figma file, but we need to do the same down here in our footer. Now our footer is done with a generate press element, so I'm going to go up to elements here and open up this footer in a new tab. The same principle is going to apply here, except here we have several different sections to deal with. First is the CTA section. I didn't label these, but I'll go ahead and do it now just to make it easier to tell. Next is the actual footer, so we'll just call this footer. And then here are our privacy link. I'm just going to call that links there inside the block name. What we need to do is wrap this CTA section and the footer section in a div, kind of like we did in that hero section. So I'll just grab the CTA section and click Add to Container. We can open that up and see our CTA sections now inside of it. And I'm going to drag this footer section in just below it. So now both the footer and CTA are wrapped inside this container. Now we just need to repeat that same process we had before. If you remember on this outer container, we went in and gave it this clamp value for the padding. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that so we can use the same value here inside this container. We'll scroll down to our padding and paste it in for the left and the right. Now for both the CTA and the footer sections, which I'll select both by holding Shift and clicking both of them here inside the list view, we need to go down to our max width, and we'll change this to 1440, and we'll go to our margin and do an auto on the left and the right. Let's go ahead and update this and take a look at the front end to see if we're on the right track. So yep, now this is being restricted to that 1440 on both of those sections here. All we need to do is round these corners. Now this looks really strange because we're running into this stripe here, but later in the tutorial we're going to get rid of this gray background, so this isn't going to be such an awkward kind of position here. Back into the footer, I'm going to go to the CTA section and we're going to go down to our borders and give it a top left and top right border radius of 12 to match what we did on that hero. And then on the footer, we're going to go here and do a bottom left and a bottom right of 12 pixels. Now, I could have wrapped both of these in a container and just gave it a border radius all the way around, but this just happens to be the structure I used to build out this footer, and this should work fine. Again, we'll go ahead and update this, refresh it on the front end, and we can see those rounded corners are working perfectly. I use that same pseudo element trick here to kind of mask this image. So I know we're going to have to go in here to the CTA section and set these overflows to hidden as well, since I kind of did the same layout trick there. We'll update that again, and now we can test everything responsively. We'll go into the inspector and we'll break this down till we get to the tablet view. Here, I think everything still looks great. And if we go into our mobile view and scroll down, the footer looks exactly like I want it to, so no other responsive settings needed. Next, let's go ahead and tackle this gray border in our kind of pre-header menu up here, since that's going to be pretty easy to fix. I'm just going to go ahead and close out that footer since we're done with it. This pre-header menu was done with an element as well, so I'll just open that up in a new tab. Here in the list view, we can see we just have one container here and it's got a gray background. So I'll just scroll down to the colors tab and we'll clear out that gray background. Now to make it match the Figma file, I'm going to give it a 1 pixel bottom border and we're going to change this color to our gray 50. We'll go ahead and hit update on that. We'll refresh it on the front end. And now this should be matching our Figma file perfectly. I'll go ahead and close out this pre-header menu and we can look at this, our stripey version here and our non-stripey version here. I think this gray border does a good job of kind of separating these menus so they don't run into each other, but it's not as stripey looking at this. Now as I go back and forth between these, it makes it really apparent to me that this is a much more professional look than this one. Now, like I said, that's not going to be the same case in every design. None of this means you should never ever do this and you're breaking a huge rule if you do it, but I'm just trying to illustrate the idea that we don't have to use stripes in all of our sections to make them have separation. Here we use this gray border in between these two, which separated them nicely without completely closing them off. For the hero, we kind of brought it into the mix of everything by just bringing it off the sides and not making it take up the full screen. These are just a couple little tricks, but let's go ahead and dive into the next ones. Back here inside of our Figma file, we have this gray dashed border that kind of goes behind this image here. This helps separate this second section here from the next one by just giving it a little bit of a border here. Now this is pretty easy to do with a pseudo element. Thankfully, GenerateBlocks allows us to create pseudo elements in the editor, but I know not every builder does that. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and create this border using these pseudo elements inside of GenerateBlocks for this top section here. But we have a similar effect down here for the testimonial where we actually have a border on the left and a border on the top. I'll do that one with CSS, so no matter what builder you use, you could achieve this same look. We'll go ahead and tackle this one here first. Back into the editor, we'll go down to this section here. This is our empowering section and we'll open up this structure so we can take a look. Here we have the section. Inside of it is the container that's kind of restricting this width to our content width. And then we have a left column and a right column. So to do this, like I said, I'm going to use a pseudo element and I'm going to absolutely position that pseudo element. So I have to decide what it needs to be attached to and what I'm going to position it relative to. So for me, it's going to be this wrapper here. To create a pseudo element, I have to be using a class, and thankfully this one I already used a class as I was developing it. And since this isn't going to be reused throughout the site in ways I can't predict, I can go ahead and use the same class to create my pseudo element. We'll go ahead and click on it here, and I do need to make one change to this container itself, and that's changing the position from default to relative. That's just going to make sure that when we create our pseudo element that it's positioned relative to this container. To create a pseudo element, we'll go up here to our more and we'll click new. And we have the option for a before or after pseudo element. Every element here can have a before and after. We'll just go ahead and choose our before, although it doesn't matter which one you choose. And we'll hit create. Now pseudo elements need to have content in them. For this, I'm just going to use 2 quote marks, which just leaves blank content. You can see that's kind of broken my layout here. That's because now this pseudo element is taking up space. But we're going to fix that by going into position and changing the position to absolute. Now it's taken out of the flow of the content and it's not going to push anything around. So here's where we're going to decide where this is being absolutely positioned relative to that wrapper container. We can go ahead and do the left, which is fine. The left or right would both work perfectly. And since the border is going to go kind of at the bottom side of this, I'm going to go ahead and absolutely position it to the bottom of that container. Next, we need to give this a size. I'm going to go with 100% width, so I've changed that here to 100%. And the height doesn't really matter because we're just going to be using a border, but I'll just use 5 pixels here, and we'll give this a background color so you can see this element is actually living on the screen. Here is this red box that's 100% of the width of this container, and then 5 pixels high. Obviously, we don't want it to have a red background, so I'll go ahead and clear that out, and we can go ahead and give it a border now. So here under borders, I'm going to go to our bottom border. We'll give it a 2 pixel border. We'll change this to dashed and we'll give it a gray color to match our other border. I know that's a little bit difficult to see on the screen. Maybe we'll just go with a bit of a darker gray here just as we set things up. Then I can fix the color at the end. Let's go ahead and save this for now and take a look at the front end. And we can see this border is perfectly positioned at the bottom since we told it to be positioned at the 0 pixels from the bottom. What we actually need to do, according to our Figma file, is move this line up a little bit. You can see here it's actually just up slightly from the bottom of this image. I'm just going to grab a box here and we'll kind of draw something out. We can see it's about 39 pixels from the bottom. That's close enough for me to say 40 pixels. So let's hop back into the editor here. I'm going to make sure we have our before pseudo element that we created selected. And back here in the position, I'm going to change this from 0 pixels to 40 pixels. That's going to move it 40 pixels up from the bottom. Now, inside Gutenberg, when we have this little add block icon, that actually takes space up in our layout. So now it looks like it's kind of off. But you can see if I click off of that section, it's now been moved up 40 pixels. Let's go ahead and go back onto that element. We got to make sure we select it again. We'll go into our borders and we're going to change this to our light gray color, hit update, and now we can check it on the front end. Hit refresh, and we can see now the color and position is great. Unfortunately, it's on top of this image, but we can fix that pretty easily with z-index. I'll go ahead here to our right-hand side container, and we'll just change this z-index to 2 and hit update. Again, we'll refresh this, and now that border is back behind the image. Now this really isn't creating the effect we need it to because we do have this stripe here, but once we get rid of that gray background, you're going to see that the stripe actually helps separate some of this content. However, before we do any of that, let's go into our inspect tool and see how this works responsively. When I break this down into our tablet view, these two columns actually stack with these images on top and the text underneath. Obviously, this dashed line is not really appropriate here where it is, and I actually think we don't need this dashed line at all. If you remember back to our Figma file, we're going to be using this gray gradient kind of swoosh thing to separate these two sections. So I don't think we need the dotted line and the swoosh here. The dotted line worked nicely when we had this as two columns. It kind of separated these images and text from the next section. But here, when those things are stacked, I don't think it's really needed. So all we have to do is go back in here into that pseudo element. It was here on this container, the empowerment grid, and then it was our before element. We'll go here to our tablet and mobile, and we'll go to our layout, our display, and we'll change it to none. That will make sure we get rid of this dotted line here on tablet and mobile. We'll refresh here, and we can see now that line is gone. So that should get you familiar with how you can do this inside GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. But if you're using a different builder, let me show you how we could tackle the same kind of thing using just CSS. We'll look again here at our Figma file and scroll down to our testimonial section. We need to get rid of that gray background, and then we have two dashed lines. One goes at the top of the testimonial and one over here on the left. So let's go back into our browser. We'll scroll down here to our testimonial section and we'll take note of what we need to do. We need to get rid of this gray background, and then we need to give something in here a class so that we can target it and write our CSS to create these two pseudo elements. Just like we did this dash line up here as a pseudo element, we're going to do the same thing down here. We're just going to write the CSS for it. So let's jump back into the editor. We'll go back into our desktop view and we'll go down to our testimonial section. Here we can go down to our background color and clear that out. And then let's take a look at the layout here. What we have is our normal wrapper, which is going to wrap this and contain the width to our content width. And then we have a wrapper inside of it, which is actually squishing this testimonial in a little bit more narrow. Because our lines are going to go out to our content width, I think we actually want to use this wrapper container as our class where we can attach these pseudo elements. So here on this container, I'm just going to scroll down to the advanced tab where we can add an additional class, and we'll just call this testimonial section. I'll go ahead and copy that class so I have it here on my clipboard, and we'll hit update. We can go back to the front end and go into the customizer where we'll be able to preview our CSS as we write it. I did have to write a little bit of CSS here when I built out the original stripey version. I'm just going to move that all the way to the bottom here so it's out of our way and doesn't get confusing. Let's scroll down and look at our testimonial section, which now has had the gray background removed. And we're going to put in .testimonial section, which I had on my clipboard, and we'll open and close our curly brackets. Just like before, we need to set the position of this to relative, and that's all we need to do on this testimonial section. I'll go ahead and copy this selector again, because now we need to actually target our pseudo elements. We'll start with our before pseudo element. In this one, we're actually going to need both the before and after pseudo elements to do our left border and our top border. It doesn't matter which one we do which. I'll just start with this testimonial section before being our top border. So like before, we need to set some content. So I'm just going to do 2 quote marks, which gives us empty content. We need to set the position to absolute. We can set the top to 0 pixels and the left to 0 pixels just to give it some coordinates. We'll do a width of 100%, which I know we're going to have to change later, and a height of, I don't know, we'll just say 5 pixels again, even though that doesn't really matter. Now, of course, you're just having to imagine this all right now because you can't see anything on the screen. But if I give it a background color of red, you can see we've now created a box that's 100% wide, 5 pixels tall, and it's positioned to the top and the left. Now, we don't need a background color of red, of course, so let's just change that out to a border top. We'll do 2 pixels dashed, and we can just go ahead and leave it black for now, although we need to go back and change this color to our appropriate gray color eventually. It's just so light, I want to make sure to use something dark you can see here on the screen recording. Now this isn't positioned exactly where I want it, but let's go ahead and get our other line in here first, and then we can start working on that. We're actually going to have to use some calculations here to make these all line up perfectly, so let's just start with the most simple version, and then we can add complexity as we need it. I'm going to go ahead and grab all of these rules we wrote for the before and paste them in here and change this to after. Now we have a second version that's just setting right on top of this, but we need to make it appropriate for our left border. We can leave the top to 0 and the left to 0, but now the width needs to be 5 pixels and the height needs to be 100%. Here for the border top, we'll just do a border left. So now we can see we have this after pseudo element creating a border on the left. Now this is close to what we need, but not exactly what we want. Here we can see this top border actually needs to go quite a bit of ways off the top of the testimonial. And both of these kind of overlap each other and extend past their boundaries. So let's talk about how we'll do that next. First of all, our before pseudo element, which is our top one, let's give it some more space between the dashed line and this testimonial. To do that, I'll just go to this top coordinates. Instead of top of 0, let's do a negative 60 pixels. That will move it 60 pixels off the top of that testimonial. Obviously, that's created a problem here, but we'll fix that here in a second. To make this extend over to the left, let's say we do that 60 pixels as well. Let's make the width a calc instead of 100%. Here we'll do calc, that way we can do some math. We'll do 100% plus 60 pixels. Now you can see that's actually added it over here to the right, so we could fix that one of 2 ways. I think the easiest way is to just change this positioning from left to right, and you can see now that's pushed that extra over to the left-hand side here, because now it's aligning it here on the right side of this container. Now we need to do the same thing to this dashed line on the left. Here it needs to be 100% of the container, plus the 60 pixels of padding we have here, plus 60 more pixels on top of it, which we added for this extra width for the overhang. So here, instead of the height, again, I want to do a calc. We'll type calc and open and close our parentheses. We can do 100%. Then we'll do plus the 60, which I know is just 120 pixels. This has gone ahead and added that 120 pixels, but it's added it to the bottom since we positioned this to the top. We can do the same trick here and just change this top to bottom, which will align this down here at the bottom of that container and give us that overlap effect we were looking at. Now, we've kind of magic numbered this by adding just default pixel values here. In production, I would probably turn these into some kind of variables so I can reference them all in one place and be able to change this in the future. Now that feels a little bit out of scope for this tutorial, and we have a lot of other things to tackle, so I'm just going to leave these default pixel values in there for now. All we have to do here is just replace this black with our variable color, which was just var gray 50. And we'll copy and paste this so we can replace this black down here. So as far as how this looked in the Figma file and how it looks inside of our browser now, it's pretty dang close. I'm sure it's not exact pixels, but it gives us the same idea here. If we go into tablet, I think this still works pretty well. This is kind of overflowing the page, which for me works fine. But when we get into mobile, scroll back down here, we can see we run into an issue. I like where these dotted lines are placed, but now the testimonial isn't fitting in very well. I need the testimonial to be moved over to the right to be kind of equal padding what we have on the top and the left. Now we have 60 pixels here, which I'm afraid if we move this testimonial over 60 pixels, it's going to be too much. So I actually think we need to reduce this padding here and add some padding here. Now, because we created this dashed line here in our CSS, we're going to have to write a media query to change this from the 60 pixels it is here to 40 pixels. So to do that, we'll do @media, we'll do a max width, and I know in GeneratePress that's 768 pixels for the mobile view, and we'll open and close our parentheses. Here I can grab this testimonial before, which is our top pattern here, and we'll change this from a position of top -60 to maybe -40 pixels. And that's brought it down quite a bit. I think that's going to be more appropriate once we move this testimonial over. We'll go ahead and publish that. We'll jump back here into our editor and we'll go ahead and grab this wrapper that holds the testimonial here, go into our mobile version, and we'll add the same 40 pixels of left padding just to match what we have on the top here. We're kind of mixing and matching the way we're approaching these things, but this should work just fine. Let's go ahead and jump out of the customizer now that we've saved everything. We'll go into our responsive view and scroll down to this testimonial. Here we can see on the desktop, everything looks fine. And as we collapse down to our tablet version, we have this here, which I think again looks fine with this kind of overlapping and going off the screen. And as we go down to our mobile version, I'll have to scroll down to find it. This padding that we added on the left-hand side has now kicked in. And I think this looks really great on mobile as well. So no matter if you're able to do this in the editor like we did for the first one, creating a pseudo element inside GenerateBlocks, you can do it that way. But if you're using a builder that doesn't allow you to do this, you could always do this with just a few lines of CSS. So now by using both examples here inside this video, you're able to recreate this pseudo element using the tools inside GenerateBlocks Pro, or if you're using another builder, you can just use a simple CSS to create the same exact effect. Hopping back into Figma here, I think the next thing we need to tackle are these little swooshy gradient lines I created. Again, we're going to use pseudo elements here, so I'm going to show you one of these using all the tools built into GeneratePress and GenerateBlocks. And then we'll kind of fake this other one using only CSS without drawing this exact shape, but coming up with something that looks very, very similar. This way, if you use the Generate family, you'll be able to do it like I show you in this first part. And if you use another builder, you can always create this with any kind of system just using the CSS. So let's go ahead and jump back into the editor now. We'll go back to our desktop version and scroll up to this first section here, which is the services section. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the rest of these panels so we're not distracted by them. So the first thing we need to do is just get rid of that gray background behind it. So we'll go ahead and clear out that background color. And we can see now that little dotted line in this section before it makes a little bit more sense and kind of helps separate this area over on the left. But what we need to do is bring in that shape over on the right. So I'll just go into Figma here and I'll scroll up, grab this shape, and I'm going to export it as a SVG. Now we did have one comment saying how this version, the non-stripey version, would be terrible for performance. But other than this one SVG that we got to save out, which is only 4 kilobytes, I don't think there's really going to be any difference in performance. So we'll go ahead and export this out. We'll just call this right blob and save that as an SVG. And we'll go back in here into the editor. So again, we're going to have to use pseudo elements here, so we need to add a class. This does already have a section class on it, but I'm using this as a utility class, and that's reused on a lot of sections where I don't want this little blob thing. So we're going to create a new class for it. We'll just call this blob right, and that way we can always reuse this if we need to on another section. So we'll go ahead and start with the blank style. And since we're going to be positioning this element to this container here, we need to go into position and change this to relative. To get our pseudo element, we'll go under more, we'll create a new one, and we'll select our before. Again, it doesn't matter, we could choose before or after, it's the same difference. And we'll go ahead and hit create. Now we could do this as an element itself or as a background image. I typically will go with a background image in my pseudo because it's just decoration anyway, so we don't need any kind of alt tag on it. And for me, it's easier to position. So I'm gonna go ahead and add blank content in here by just adding our 2 quote marks. We'll go into the position and we'll change the position to absolute. And we're gonna position this to the top and the right, which should put us up in this corner, which is kind of the general starting place we want. In the sizing, I'm just gonna go ahead and go with 100% and 100%. Here, if I add a background color to it now, we should see that this pseudo element is covering the entire section here. We'll go ahead and clear out that background because what we want to use instead is our swoosh design. So here, I'll go to add new. We have this background type as image, and I'm going to go in here and upload this swoosh file, which is right blob. Now we can see by default, it's in a pretty decent position already. With the UI in the way here, if we close this out, the screen gets a little bit wider, and if we close this one out, it gets wider. I think in our Figma version, it's actually a little bit lower. Yeah, you can see it kind of lines up with the top of this text, but this is approximation anyways. Everything in web design today is fluid and responsive, so we don't need to worry about peeping every pixel. We just need to get it generally in the right spot. Thankfully, there's not much contrast between this background color and this text, so we don't have to worry about this interfering with the legibility of our text. Now that we clicked on all that, we got to click back in to get to our pseudo element here. We'll get back to where we were. We want to make sure that the background position is set to top right. Right now, the background position is set to center, which is center, center. We actually want to position this at the top right. And when we do that, you're going to see it looks like it's almost too big for the screen. It's going all the way over. And that's because we actually have this background size set to cover. What I want to do is set this to auto, which is going to keep it the size it was inside the Figma file. Now, we might have to play with that as we go into the responsive versions, and you could always click these little 3 dots and have a custom value. But for now, I think auto or contain is going to work for these purposes. Like I said, it's not going to be perfect exact with the Figma file, and that's okay. We'll go ahead and close out the UI here and take a look again. I think it's obviously too high. We want to bring it down some, and we can do that with the positioning. So again, into blob right, clicking on the before pseudo element and going to the position. I'm going to change this by maybe 100 pixels. And I'm changing the top value to 100 so it moves it down 100. Again, we'll close the UI. And I think this is pretty close. It might be a little bit further down still in the Figma file. So maybe we'll just go in here, go to our after element and change this to maybe 140. Let's go ahead and update this page. We'll view it on the front end. And we can see that the position looks pretty good, but the Z index is an issue. On the back end, we're not having that Z index issue, but here on the front end, it's actually having the pseudo element on top of the content inside the section. That's pretty easy to fix. We'll just go back in here, pop open the list view, grab all the containers inside of here, which is this top one for the lead and the 2-column section here. And we're going to change this Z index to 2, which will just make sure that it's in front of that pseudo element. Now, if we refresh, we see it's right in place. Now let's take a look by default and see how this looks on tablet and mobile. If we go here to our tablet breakpoint, I just want to make sure I'm pretty close to right where that changes to tablet, which should be about right here. I still don't mind this positioning. We didn't have drawings how this is supposed to look in all of our responsive views, and often we don't have that from designers. But because the contrast is low, I think we're okay. We might not want to make it run right through there, so maybe we push it down just a little bit further, or we go up above this heading so it's not going right through it right here. So let's go ahead and go back in here. I'm gonna go ahead and grab this pseudo element again, blob right, before, and we're gonna change this to our tablet view. So let's go into our position. We have to tell this that it's absolute again, and let's just change that value to 0. We'll go ahead and hit update, and we'll refresh it on this end. Now we can see this actually starts up here, and since our little dotted line is gone, I think this is actually a better way to separate these two sections. So I think for the tablet version, that's perfectly fine. And if we go here to the mobile version, we'll scroll down and take a look. I like that just as well there, so I don't think we need to make any other changes to this one. Now, just like I said before, your builder might not allow you to create pseudo elements right inside the builder. In fact, I'm not sure if any other builders allow you to do that. So I'm going to show you how you can do the same exact thing, just writing some simple CSS. When I drew this shape out, I just drew something kind of on the fly, and it ended up creating more of kind of a circle shape. While we do have this swoop down here, it fades to the background color so quickly, kind of transparent, that you don't even really notice it. So I think we could get away with just drawing a circle using CSS, or maybe an oval, and then using a gradient. This way you wouldn't even need to go into Figma to draw a shape. So let's go ahead and tackle how that would be done. We'll need to go back into the editor here. This is our treatment section, and we need to add a class to it. So I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to call this treatment section. We'll go ahead and copy that selector and hit update. We'll go to the front end and go back into the customizer. Again, I'm just going to push all this CSS out of the way so we're not confused by it. And we'll scroll down to this treatment section. Go ahead and select that and we can start working on it. Now, like before, we're positioning everything relative to this section. So I'm going to do position relative here on the section, and then we'll add our before pseudo element. Just like before, we need to add blank content. We need to do the position of absolute. We'll do a top 0 and a left 0. We can do a width of, let's just say 500 pixels, just to give us something to start out with. Now, we know we want this to be a circle, so instead of having to write 500 height to, knowing we might have to change that in the future, I'm going to do an aspect ratio, which is going to lock in this aspect ratio of 1/1, which will keep it a perfect square or perfect circle the entire time. Now, just so we can see it, let's go ahead and add a background of red, and you can see our pseudo element is showing up there. We'll keep that red block there just for now so we can get everything in order. We know we want this to be a circle, so I'm going to do a border radius of 100 VW. That's just a very large number to make sure that this always stays a circle. Now, if we look up at this one, we can tell it's definitely quite a bit bigger and it's pushed off of the edge. So I think what we want to do is go ahead and change the size. I might do something like 80 VW, so that's 80% of the viewport width. And then we need to transform it and translate it over off the side. So to do that, I'm going to do transform. I'm going to do translate X, and let's do minus 50%. So that's going to do minus 50% of the size of this element. That might be a little bit too much, so maybe we do 40%. It looks as if this one kind of starts bending back down on the side. So I think that's a pretty close approximation to what we have on the other one. We just need to fix the color. So to do that, instead of doing a red background, we'll do background, linear gradient. We need to give it some kind of direction. If you remember, this one kind of has the darkest color up at the top right corner and goes at an angle here. So what I'll do is maybe 140 degrees and then a comma. Let's just do red, comma, blue so we can see if it's working. So yeah, we're seeing red start up here and blue down here. So instead of blue, we want this to be transparent. So now we can see that's fading out. And then instead of red, we want it to be our color from our palette, which is just var gray 50. Okay, so this is starting to come together, but I can see the edge of the circle all the way around. It might be hard to see on the screen share, but you can see it cutting right through her arm right here. I actually want this transparent stop in the gradient to be further up. So what I'm going to do is change this to maybe like 40%. And now we can't see exactly where that's ending. It's almost starting to fade out right as we get to this text. Maybe we change it to 30%. Nope, that's getting even further the wrong way. So maybe 70%. There it's still, that might be a little bit too far. I think we go right in the middle. 60% should do it. Now, of course, we're having that Z index issue too, but I can actually show you a trick how to fix that here in the code in case you don't have the option to change the Z index. What we'll do here back in our treatment section selector is do isolation and isolate, and that just sets a new stacking context for this section. And then we can do a Z index of -1, and that will put it back behind all this content here. So I'm going to cut this out just so you can see blue. You can see now with that isolation isolate and the Z index at -1, it's gone behind everything. I'll go ahead and put our gradient back in there now. We'll go ahead and hit publish. We'll hide these controls and take a look. Here's our original version with the SVG, and here's our version just done with CSS. Honestly, if you didn't know this shape was a little irregular, you would probably never notice these two sections are different. But let's go ahead and take a look at what it looks like on tablet. Here, it looks like it's getting a little bit small. I like its position. It's similar to the one up there, but I think we need to make it bigger. And then here on mobile, yep, now here it's much too small. So we need to control both the tablet and mobile version. We might be able to do both of those with one media query. So let's do @media. We'll do a max width of 1024 pixels, which is the breakpoint for tablet. And then we'll go in here and grab our selector for the treatment section before for our pseudo element. We know we need to change the width. I'm going to go back to tablet first since we know we have to work on that. Let's change that width to, I'm going to say like 180 viewport width. The reason I'm doing it even wider than the screen is because we have that translate on here. Where is it? That translate right here that's moving it halfway over. So we can actually afford for it to be bigger than the screen because it's kind of going off of the screen. If we look at this one, it looks like it's meeting the text about, I don't know, 35–40% of the way across the screen. And this one looks like it's meeting the text about the same going the other way. Maybe it could stand to be a hair bigger and we just do 200 viewport width. I think that looks great. As far as the position, top, right, left, and bottom, I think it looks just fine the way it is. So we'll go here and we'll go to our mobile version. Here for mobile, I think this works too. It's a little bit different than this other one, and we could probably go in and tweak it just a little bit more, but I think you get the idea that we can recreate something really similar here just using a few lines of CSS. This is what, maybe 24 lines of CSS to accomplish all of that there if you want to save yourself from creating the SVG. Now, the last thing we need to take care of to match this Figma design is this overlapping section here. Out of all the techniques I showed in the last video, this is the one that people dislike the most. And I have to admit, this isn't the best example of overlapping content, but let me show you a couple places where I think this actually works really well. Here on my agency website, you'll see after the hero section and before the about section, I have these little icons overlapping this section break, so it kind of brings the two together. If we go down here, we have this overlapping arrow and kind of use of a gradient here. This is another use of kind of overlapping elements between sections. And then lastly here in this call to action before my footer, this website mockup just overlaps the section above it just to kind of bring those two in together. I'm afraid if this image was stuck down inside this container, this would just look like a really boring line across my website for no real reason. So even though these are better examples, let's go ahead and tackle what we have inside this design to overlap this section into our hero here. We'll go here to our empowering section and go to the container inside of it. I think this is what we want to move up, but we do have some padding that's in here inside of our default section that we probably need to get rid of first. Now, I don't want to change that on the class because I don't want to affect every other section that's using this section default. So I'm just going to go here to the padding on the block itself and change that out to 0. Now you can see these butt up next to each other perfectly. Now we can go to this container that holds all of my content and we can just use some negative margin, maybe something like -60 pixels. And that brings it up just a little bit like that. So let's go ahead and update that. We'll get out of the customizer here. And now we can see this content is overlapping the hero. It actually looks like I might have built out this section a little bit different than the Figma file. Yeah, on the Figma file, the one on the left is tall and the one on the right is short. I think I actually prefer it the way I built it here. But now we have that overlapping content effect. However, we're definitely going to have to look at how this works on responsive devices, because once these get tight in with one another, we're going to have this image kind of overlapping this button. So let's go here and let's change this to our tablet version. On tablet, I've decided that this column that holds all my images should only take up about 50% of the width, because if it took up 100% of the width, it just feels like giant images for no reason. So we'll put that back at 50, which I think is fine. But we have the problem of this button and these images kind of clashing here. If we still want to keep the overlap effect, there's a couple different things we could do. We can just go to this hero section here and change the bottom padding. Let's do something like 80 pixels. Now that gives us a little bit of space there, but probably not quite enough. So maybe we go to 120. At this point, I think there's enough space in between here that it's not distracting from this button, but still kind of brings these two sections together. Again, I don't think this is the best example in the world, but I'm just trying to show you how you'd go about doing these kind of overlap designs. Sometimes it's the case where you just don't want things to overlap at different viewports. We could go ahead and just change this section to get rid of the negative margin. We'll just change that back to 0 and go back to our section here, and we could put in something like 60 pixels of top padding. You can always make these decisions to make things overlap or not overlap based on breakpoints. That's what media queries are for, and sometimes you might find that that just makes more sense. Of course, we'd want to go back in here and get rid of this override we did to the bottom, which is here on the tablet version. We can go ahead and get rid of that. And now during tablet or mobile, that looks okay. Now, since we had some people concerned about the performance implications of these changes, I figured it'd be worth going ahead and running a page speed insights or Lighthouse test again. So go in here to Lighthouse and we'll analyze this page load. And we see even over on this overlapping version where we've changed out all the stripey bits, we're still getting a 100% performance score here. So I don't see how this would have any kind of negative effects on the performance of the site. Now, I know this video is quite a bit longer than normal, so I do appreciate you sticking around. I just wanted to make sure to tackle this topic since so many people thought this would be so challenging inside the builder. I really think that being able to do some of these more advanced techniques makes your design stand out, and it really doesn't take that long. Obviously, it took me about 45 minutes here to explain all this to you, but when I tested this before I actually recorded the video, I was able to do all of these changes in about 10 minutes or so, so I think it's definitely worth the effort. If you learned something new in this video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you want to see the next video, then make sure to hit subscribe, and we'll see you then.